Hello and welcome to another video from me, the History Tutor, and in this one we're looking at the AQA topic of America 1920-1973, and we're going to look at how civil rights developed for black Americans in the 1950s and 60s. Okay then, so we're going to be revising our knowledge about the black Americans in the 1950s and 60s in a moment. We'll have a quiz and you can use that to focus your revision, and obviously I'll explain a few more ideas and bits of knowledge that will be useful to you. We're also going to look at interpretation questions 1 and 2 for the AQA history exam. These questions, really important you understand the exact criteria of what to do. It could be an easy 8 marks, but also it could be easily lost marks if you don't quite get the skills correct. But firstly, before we go through that, let's go to a quiz and recap your knowledge. Okay, here's a quiz for you, 8 questions that you can find in the revision guide as well, and write in the answers you go through. So have a look through the revision guide pages or your revision notes, or have a look back through my revision video and see if you can find the ideas and the answers you need for this quiz. So maybe fill in the bits you can remember and then search out some of the ideas to help your revision. Okay, so pause me now and give it a go. Okay, so here's my answers then. So who challenged the Board of Education 1951? So we've got Brown versus Board of Education, and this was an NAACP supported venture. So the NAACP were very much trying to challenge laws. They realized that the Supreme Court laws were one of the big things stopping civil rights for black Americans, and so they started to challenge some of the laws. You might be aware that a lot of the segregation was based on a law called Plessy versus Ferguson, which was the Supreme Court law that said black and white Americans could be separate but must be equal. So clearly, if they were not equal, then they could be challenged in the court of law. And Brown had pointed out that the education of his children was not equal to those people around him in the white communities, so they challenged this and they won the case. The school system was not equal in this area. So that was one of the first big successes. So then they start to challenge this a little bit more. And so question number 2, how many states were not allowing non-segregated education by 1956? We still got 6 states in the South not allowing non-segregated education. So obviously the work was not quite all achieved, but the Board of Education Brown case had a lot of its success. And obviously that led to things like Little 9, which you should look over in the revision guide. In which city was the bus boycott led by Parks and King? So we've got Montgomery, so now a new segregation issue being challenged with the bus boycott. So Eisenhower introduced, after the bus boycott, the 1957 Civil Rights Act. This started to try and remove some of the foundations of the segregation laws, but it wasn't quite strong enough as a law to really get the federal states to do as they're told. So more protests were needed to end segregation. So and King inspired many protests. So 2 of them for question 5 could be restaurant sit-ins or the freedom rides. Restaurant sit-ins were very much people would just go and sit at a restaurant counter where they were banned from doing that. So then these black Americans would be beaten up and hit and punched and dragged out of these cafes. It would lead to a huge amount of press coverage and bad coverage of the southern states, and so eventually the restaurants had to give in. They had to allow any race to sit in their restaurants and anywhere on any table because they were losing so much business. They were likely to go bankrupt, a bit like the buses and the bus boycott. Freedom rides were slightly different. These were people who are campaigning for end of segregation on the sort of state coaches, and they were sitting on any seat they liked. When they got to the bus stations, they were sitting in any cafe or waiting area, because there would be white waiting areas and black waiting areas, and they would sit in the white areas, and this was to sort of try and end the segregation in these areas. So name 2 marches that King led. So we've got the March on Washington, which ends with the famous I Have a Dream speech. It's the one with the hundreds of thousands of people around the Lincoln Memorial you've seen pictures and ideas of. Now the Selma March and the Birmingham March were marches through towns where there were sort of dodgy mayors or police leaders, and these marches were violently attacked because of the racist attitudes of the people. So Selma was all about trying to get votes, and Birmingham was all about ending the segregation within Birmingham as well. So name two people that led Black Power. So you got led to Black Power. So you got Malcolm X, who initially started the idea of the sort of supporting the idea of the Nation of Islam. So this was the idea that there was going to be maybe a new black nation for Black Americans, and they should not try and have better rights within the United States of America, but that was a broken system and they should have their own nation. Now Stokely Carmichael led to the idea of Black Power. He promoted the idea that black people should have massive confidence in themselves, that they're beautiful, they're wonderful, they are great people, and it led to the 1968 Mexico Olympic Black Power protests, where they stood there with their sort of fists in the air and the black gloves on. And finally, a group that was protecting black neighborhoods were Black Panthers. So we started to have racial riots and protests as the 1960s developed, particularly around the era of poverty and the area of employment, and that led to racial tensions developing. So the Black Panthers were protecting their neighborhoods. Sorry, please allow me to interrupt just for a moment to tell you about some of the other services I offer. So look at my website, historytutor.co.uk, to find out more about history tutoring if you want help directly one-to-one, or if you've got a small group of friends who want help, then look me up. Also, if you want more information about my revision guides, they're available on Amazon. They are packed full of revision notes, all the essential facts, organised into revision cards or simple forms you can just look over again and again to revise. Packed full of videos helping you answer questions. I tutor you through how to answer all the different types of questions. Lots of videos explaining how to do this. Some of them are free on YouTube. Look me up for more videos, but you'll find more and more videos on my revision guides. So take a look. Okay, well, here's our first question. So, how does interpretation B differ from interpretation A about the leadership of Martin Luther King to the Civil Rights Movement? So, explain your answer based on what it says in interpretations A and B. This is what question 1 will look like. You obviously might have a different topic to this in your exam, but it will start off with these key words and phrases. So, it's really important we understand how to do this correctly. So look back over that question and see if you can work out what would make a successful answer. What does it want you to look at in terms of when you're looking at the interpretations? You can obviously see them if you've got my revision guide. If not, you can sort of flick forward in the video and you can see the interpretations. But at the moment, I'm just asking you about skills. You don't need to think about actually the content yet of the interpretations, just what skills you think need to show to be successful. So pause me now and have a look back over the question wording and have a think about the skills you think you need to be successful. Okay, so here's what is really crucial for you to do. So you need to write a summary of A and suggest the key message. Okay, you need to write a little summary of B and suggest the key message. Then you need to give a summary sentence making it clear what the difference is between them. Okay, so basically this is a suggestion skill. We need to suggest what this person is saying about the leadership of Martin Luther King to the Civil Rights Movement. One of them is probably going to be positive, one's probably going to be negative, or one's going to be super positive, one's going to think it's all right. There's going to be that sort of idea there. So we're going to find obviously a difference. We need to make sure we're clear on the difference. You do not need to use any of the provenance, the background of the source, or any knowledge. You're only suggesting ideas from the source. Obviously, the better suggestions get the better marks. Okay, let's have a go at this question then. So, as we said, how does B differ from A about the leadership of Martin Luther King? So have a read through source A. Try and get a general message of what it says. Okay, and then we'll look at source B in a moment. Okay, so pause now and have a look at source A. Okay, you've got your idea for source A. Now let's have a look at source B. Okay, so you're only using the content, not the italics, only using the content message in there. Read through and get a general message of what source B says about the leadership of Martin Luther King. Pause me now and get an idea for source B. Okay, so here's what I've gone for. I've said the key message of A is that King was the main leader of the Civil Rights Movement and he inspired peaceful protests across America. Whereas B says the people were the main cause. Mass action of the people led to victory in events like the bus boycott. So not really his leadership. Okay, so how do we now write this out as an answer? Now, it's one of the few times where I say maybe don't do a P paragraph because you'll end up writing too much. You just need to say what the interpretation says and suggest a meaning, and then repeat the message B, and then have maybe a concluding sentence. So we're more dealing with evidence and a sort of concluding sentence. So let's give it a go with A. So A, remember, thought that Martin Luther King was doing great leadership. So maybe find a little quote or a summary that you could say about A and then suggest the meaning about his leadership. Okay, so pause me now and give that a bit of a go. Okay, so here's what I've said. Maybe this will help you do, a really better job with B if you weren't quite sure what you were doing. So interpretation A says that Martin Luther King was crucial to the NAACP and he inspired peaceful protests across America. This suggests the leadership of Martin Luther King was important to rights as he used his Christian values in speeches to inspire protests. Okay, so remember those protests across America, like the restaurant sit-ins, the freedom rides, these were peaceful protests. People were not causing trouble or violent or fighting. They followed King's Christian values. Okay, so you can see how I've given a summary of the first sentence and I've suggested about his leadership in the second sentence with a little bit of my knowledge and understanding in there to give a bit of depth to it. Okay, so try now with B. Give a sentence about what B says and then suggest what that says about his leadership. Okay, so pause me now and give it a go. Okay, so I've said whereas, really good word to use. Okay, it's a comparing word. Whereas interpretation B says that mass action brought about change. Okay, kept it very simple. This suggests that King's leadership was less important than the protests and actions of the people. Okay, so you could develop a little bit more that obviously people are needed to make things happen, and King would have been nothing without the people. Okay, so now we need a summary sentence. Therefore, they are different as. Okay, so obviously summarize what the difference is. Okay, so pause me now and give that bit a go. Okay, so I've said, therefore, they are different as A believes King's leadership led to protests and success, while B believes that King would not have any impact without the action of the people. Okay, you'll notice there, obviously, I've given a quick sort of idea about how they're different, but I've also stopped using the word interpretation. I've just said A and B. Okay, now if you're going to be writing long answers about these interpretations, you probably don't want to keep writing the word interpretation in your exam, so obviously be aware of that. Okay, let's have a think about the second question then. So why might the authors of A and B have a different interpretation about the leadership of Martin Luther King? Explain using the interpretation A and B and your contextual knowledge. So what do we think we need to use here in terms of skills? Now, be wary of the idea of contextual knowledge here. It's not like huge amounts of contextual knowledge needed. The main way in which you're going to think about why might authors have a different interpretation, what you're going to use more than knowledge to explain why the authors might have a different interpretation. So think about that carefully. So what do you think the success criteria is going to be for this type of question? Okay, how much we're going to write, how we're going to structure it for a why question. Think about those things. Okay, so jot down your ideas now and we'll go through what makes a successful answer in a sec. Okay, so I've said the following. So you only use the provenance of the extract now. There is no use of content. Okay, so every year I'm a marker for AQA, and often I mark paper 1, and I find people talking about the content or explaining with lots and lots of contextual knowledge, and they don't use the provenance of the extract. You will not get maybe more than 1 mark if you do not use the provenance of the extract. So who wrote it, when they wrote it, why they wrote it. This is the type of information you're using. You need 1 P paragraph. You're explaining why, so we need to explain with maybe a P structure. Only 1 paragraph, it's only 4 marks. Okay, obviously your evidence is the provenance from both extracts. Then explain why that provenance leads to a different view. Okay, very, very simple. Okay, so here is our interpretation A and B provenance. Okay, so read through the provenance and then pick out what you think are the main reasons why they are different. Okay, so have a pause and read through and come up with your ideas. Okay, so I've gone for that Interpretation A is from Martin Luther King Day celebrations. Okay, so in 1983, we started in America Martin Luther King Day to celebrate his achievements. So on Martin Luther King Day, it's unlikely you're going to make a speech that he wasn't very successful. So you're going to choose people who support him and think he's a great leader and did great things. So obviously, because it's Martin Luther King Day, they're celebrating him and talking about his greatness. Okay, so that's very, very important. It's also 1983. It's a long time after his death, and there's been lots of time to consider his great achievements. So somebody after the event looking back. You could also discuss it with Martin Luther King's biographer. Likely he's going to celebrate him rather than not, because biographers tend to want to sell books and things like that. So there's lots of reasons why the provenance is positive. So B had more negative view about King as leader. So he is, as it says in the provenance, a local leader from Montgomery. Therefore, he wants to celebrate the work of the local people, like himself. Obviously, Martin Luther King was obviously a minister there and a great local person, but this person would know lots of the people involved in the protest, would know all their achievements and what they did to make it work. So he wants to celebrate all their hard work and all the things they gave up and all the challenges they faced in what they did. So how do we answer this then? So we want a simple P answer. So interpretation A has a different view from B about the role of King's leadership because. So introduce why. That could be because of the different people writing, or the different purposes of what they're writing, or the different times they were writing about, or when they're writing. Okay, so then we give, for example, A is this, and we describe the example of the provenance, whereas B is this, and then we explain why that provenance led to a different view. Okay, let's give this a go then. So write your point then. Decide, is it different people, they've got different purposes, it's different time? What do you think is the reason why they have a different interpretation? You just need to make it clear what you're arguing now. So pause me and finish this opening sentence. Okay, so I've gone for this. Okay, I've said interpretation A has a different view to interpretation B about the role of King's leadership because they are written by very different people with different purposes. So I've gone for 2 out of the 3 criteria. So, for example, A is this, whereas B is this. So now summarise the idea to support your point. You might have said a different point to mine. That's fine. So summarise your bits of provenance to back it up. Away you go. Okay, so I've said, for example, A is by one of King's biographers at the time of the Martin Luther King National Celebration. Therefore, we would give a very positive view of King as it's part of the celebration day. Whereas B is from a local NAACP leader, Montgomery. He has a different view as he saw the work of individuals in Montgomery and what they did, so he thinks King is less important. Okay, so now I've given a little bit of explanation in there already. I think it's probably fairly clear what's happening. If maybe you just gave literally the provenance examples, didn't quite describe the sort of impact of that, that's fine. You can now explain all that in a longer explanation in your explanation bit. So let's do that now. Let's explain why this led to different views. Okay, so this means they have a different view because, away you go. Okay, so I've written this means they have a different view about the leadership of King because A wishes to celebrate King due to the start of the national holidays, celebrate King, whilst B wishes to celebrate the achievements of ordinary people as it's part of, his ordinary view as an ordinary person. Okay, so hopefully that all makes sense, how we can use the provenance to explain. We've used a little tiny bit of contextual knowledge just about those people and how those events have happened, but we haven't gone through lots and lots of events. So it's a bit of a trick having contextual knowledge written in the question there. Okay, well, I hope you managed to practice those interpretation skills and you can remember that for the exam. The criteria for the question number 1, how they're different, the criteria for question number 2, why they're different, and be successful in the exam at the end. Okay, so do look out for more of my videos. Do subscribe to keep updated, and I'll see you again soon. Bye bye for now.